Today on Inside Utah Politics, the race for the White House, several elected leaders from Utah urging Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to make a run, why they say he is the candidate to carry the Republican Party in 2024. And the Biden administration considering extending the payment pause on student loans as his forgiveness program works its way through the courts.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glen Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with State Senator Dan McKay. He's one of several elected officials here in our state urging Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to make a run for the president. Senator, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Let's start off with the elephant in the room. Tuesday night, former President Trump announcing it's official. He is running for president. You and this group got ahead of this the day before, saying no thanks to Trump. Why is that?
Well, there are a few reasons, and the group that we built, I mean, it was pretty quick. We started literally the day after midterm elections were over, and in the aftermath of seeing how the results turned out. And honestly, the future of the country depends on a vibrant Republican Party to really kind of balance the interests of the country. And the losses that we took in some states that were favored to win because of one issue or another, that kind of weighed in our mind. And also, I've never found that the solution to future problems is in looking in the rearview mirror, right? I'm always trying to look for the next opportunity, the next candidate, the next group to help us, pull forward as a country and pull together as a country. And one thing that's very clear, the 4 years of the Trump presidency, and then especially how it ended, left the country with a question as to whether or not the Republican Party itself can, really dig itself out of, or dig ourselves really out of the questions we left at the end of the Trump presidency, where people felt like the economic policy we were working on was great and positive for the country, and then we had a bunch of side distractions. And from a policy wonk like me, I would much prefer to be focused on the policy of things and less on some of the distracting things that got into the mix.
You mentioned the midterm election. When you take a look at that, it was ripe for a Republican red wave. It did not happen. So when you really dig into that, what message was that saying?
Well, I think the country was still looking at a bunch of different issues. One, you had some very difficult issues on some ballots where they were expecting a large Republican turnout and didn't turn out that way. Let's look at the abortion issue and the wisdom of putting a policy that divisive and a constitutional amendment on the ballot in some of these swing states, including Kansas, where it gave really the Democrats something to vote for and something to show up for. And I think that message was tough. And then you add to it, some of the Republican candidates were supported by President Trump and then did not do well in their general elections. And you have to stop and ask yourselves, well, are we looking to the wrong groups to endorse to really find support in these states? And it's clear that President Trump, was not helpful in those races.
More than 80 of your colleagues, these are state senators, state representatives, local mayors, county council members, came on board with this statement. Talk about the sheer size that came out right away and wanted to be involved in that. And I know that some of them on that list, probably a good portion of them, likely voted for the president the last two cycles.
Yeah, in fact, I can argue, I don't know anybody on that list that didn't say that they voted for the president in the previous years. I don't know that for sure from everyone. But I think as you look at that list, what you see is a broad coalition across different jurisdictions of the state. There's a lot of geographic diversity, and there's a lot of people who are questioning, is it possible to have the good policy of Republican policy and, standing up for the working class and all those things? Can we get that from somebody that is less distracting to the cause? And I think there's some real merit to that. And I think that's really a better way to kind of bring people along on our policies. And then you look at that group and you say, well, where are they at in this? This was really a question of, do we want competition for the primary? Do we want there to be another voice? And that's where we're looking at, Governor Ron DeSantis. He has leadership at the state level. He's led through natural disasters. Like he led through the COVID situations throughout Florida. So that's a great experience to draw from a state level to then elevate it to the federal level. And those tend to be our best candidates.
Former President Trump immediately took aim at Florida Governor Ron DeSantis after the midterms, calling him names and taking credit for basically building who he is today. What did you think when you saw those words coming from the former president?
In some ways, it reminded me all the reasons that I'm looking for an alternative. Mm-hmm. I like policymakers to be focused on policy and, to be statesmen, behind the scenes and build coalitions and build relationships. That's the way we do it in Utah. We may fight over a policy or something like that in the legislature, but really, when you get down to it, we're really good friends with the Republicans and Democrats. We meet together, we work together on things together. So I'm looking for someone who brings that model of statesmanship really to the federal level, as opposed to, feels like some, is juvenile too much to say, is some name calling. That's not my thing.
We kind of saw a tale of two countries on election night within the Republican Party. We did see this Trump factor that you talk about play out. Then we saw what DeSantis did in Florida. This has been a swing state in presidential elections going quite a few cycles back. He won in a landslide. You also saw Governor Kemp in Georgia, who also had a dispute with President Trump. He won easily on election night. Does that show you the path ahead for the Republican Party, in your opinion?
Well, I think what the country should look at when they look at those states is, here you have Republican leaders who are leading a diverse community, right? For the first time, you looked on election night, Governor Ron DeSantis is winning Miami-Dade County. That is one of the most diverse counties in the entire state, and for him to be able to pull the kind of leadership that he has done, reaching across parties on several state-related issues, to build that kind of coalition and win a diverse county like Miami-Dade, which has always been Democrat. Look back years. Mm-hmm. For him to pull that, that's a big win, and I'm hoping that's where we go.
I was going to say, do you see that translating to states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania? I
think Wisconsin, Michigan, some of those swing states up north are really going to be looking for someone who's productive, and I think that's what they really enjoyed about Scott Walker when Scott Walker was the governor of Michigan. And then you start to look at what they're looking for. They're looking for productivity and substance over the antics, and I'm less interested in the antics. That's just me. That's not who I want to be.
What's at stake here when we talk about who gets the Republican nomination in 2024 from your perspective?
In a lot of ways, I feel like the future of the Republican Party is on the ballot at the primary in 2 years. And maybe that's always the way it is. I don't know if that's hyperbole or not, but the idea that we're going to be a party from Republican side about results, and we're going to be a party about policy and working for the working class of the country, that's who we want to be, right? And then if you want to add to it the theatrics and some of the other things, I don't know that that's necessarily where we want to be. And if we can, as a party, if we can divorce ourselves from that, and then the question then becomes, if Ron DeSantis or someone else wins the Republican nomination, will that group of folks who have been hardcore Trumpers show up in November?
Right. And what do you think the answer to that is?
I like to say yes, that they'll be ready to turn the page at that point, but I think it will be a reluctant turning the page.
Do you see this statement from you and your colleagues here in Utah pushing DeSantis to the point where he might run?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I think he's already measuring, and looking at poll numbers and those kinds of things. I've seen poll data in both, Georgia and some of those swing states that you've talked to that show a significant advantage. Like Iowa, I've seen a 10-point advantage with DeSantis over Trump. And so you see already in some of these early polls that there's a strong desire to have an alternative. I don't know if our poll, I'd love to take credit for it, our letter really pushed in there. No.
Yeah.
But
Well, probably
I think
not
you'll get there.
single-handedly, but perhaps collectively with others across the country.
I think him seeing the red states like willing to jump in and help him, I think he's in.
All right, we will see how it plays out, and the primary process could be an interesting one.
It's going to be a long one, right?
Yes.
2 years.
Starts earlier and earlier. Senator, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Still to come, debating the proposed gondola for Little Cottonwood Canyon. Is it the best option for easing canyon traffic, or should UDOT reconsider? Our panel weighs in a little bit later. But first, airlines slapped with millions of dollars in fines, why the federal government is making them pay up after the break. For a second time, a court blocking the Biden administration's student loan forgiveness plan, placing yet another obstacle in the way of a program that had promised to forgive up to $20,000 in student debt for about 40 million Americans. But the education secretary speaking out about the plan to fight this in court. Washington correspondent Rashad Hudson with that story.
Education Secretary Miguel Cardona says he is ready to fight to keep student loan forgiveness on the table.
We know what we're doing is right.
Last week, a federal judge dealt another blow to the president's plan to forgive student loan debt. There are 2 lawsuits currently blocking debt cancellation. The conservative plaintiffs argue the Biden administration is overstepping its executive powers and is hurting financial institutions. But Cardona says he stands by the legal authority the department is using.
We believe very strongly that these are meritless claims.
What do you say to those millions of borrowers who maybe feel misled that, they've applied, but now it's blocked? You can't even go to the website to apply.
It's frustrating and it's unfortunate.
Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown says he is confident the Biden administration will win and says the president's action will help thousands of people in his state
that simply can't get out from under their student debt, especially these for-profit colleges and what's happened there.
The White House says it is still weighing whether to extend the student loan payment pause scheduled to resume in January. Reporting in Washington, Rashad Hudson.
Department of Transportation announcing new enforcement action against airlines for failing to provide timely refunds to customers when they were owed by law. But consumer advocates say the announced fines are a disappointment.
The Department of Transportation says it's taking historic enforcement action against airlines.
6 airlines are going to be facing fines for taking too long or creating too many obstacles for passengers who tried to get refunds.
Secretary Pete Buttigieg says his agency just handed out $7 million in fines, pushing airlines to issue hundreds of millions in refunds for pandemic-related cancellations and delays.
We know it's effective because these refunds have now been issued, or the instructions have been sent to passengers.
But not everyone is celebrating.
Well, quite frankly, we were very disappointed.
Bill McGee is with the American Economic Liberties Project, a nonprofit devoted to fighting corporate malfeasance.
There were only 7 airlines that were penalized for this. Only one of them was a U.S. airline, Frontier.
Despite Monday's announcement, McGee points out that all major U.S. airlines were left untouched by the fines.
Where were the penalties for the largest offenders? United Airlines, for example, in the year 2020, had more complaints from consumers filed with the DOT on the issue of refunds than any other airline.
And while the Transportation Department says their action will result in some $600 million in refunds, McGee says that's only a fraction of the $10 billion airlines owe their customers. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
Coming up, the heated debate over a gondola to ease canyon traffic. Our panel weighs in after the break. Time now to debate the gondola proposal for Little Cottonwood Canyon with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have Snowbird General Manager and supporter Dave Fields and former Salt Lake County Mayor and opponent Peter Kroon. Gentlemen, let's get right into it. There's no dispute something needs to be done to alleviate traffic up the canyon, but the right solution very much in dispute. It's a heated conversation in our community. So let's start off with opening statements from each of you. I'll give each of you a minute. Peter, let's start with you. Why do you say the gondola is not the right solution moving forward?
Well, first of all, I think, as you said, Glenn, all of us agree that something needs to be done about what we call the red snake, those red taillights that you see going up and down the canyon on those great winter days when we all love to go skiing. So the question is, what is the right solution? And first of all, before we spend $600 million on a gondola, on improved roads, on buses. We need to have incremental solutions. And that's what we at Friends of Alta and other environmental organizations, and a lot of people and the taxpayers of Utah believe is the right step, first step to solving the traffic issues. And so improved buses. Of course, UTA is having some problem getting staffing, so that's difficult in the short term, but long term, improved buses, more buses, and then improved road conditions. UTA has already, or UDOT, frankly, has already done a great job on some road improvements, so we need to do more of those to see if we can alleviate some of the traffic.
Okay, Dave, let's bring you in. Why do you say the gondola is the right approach to alleviating traffic up the canyon?
Well, I appreciate the fact that UDOT spent years and years studying this problem and narrowing down the transportation options to deal with a growing population here in Utah, and especially along the Wasatch Front, down to the gondola. This is the cleanest, safest, most reliable way to get people up and down the canyon on a year-round basis. We're adding 30 to 40,000 new residents into this state every year. They're moving here to enjoy the recreation we've all enjoyed our whole lives in some cases here in Utah. And we need to think about getting them up and down the canyon differently. We have a huge population explosion happening in this state. It's not realistic to think that we're going to put everybody in their private vehicle or in a bus that's stuck in the same traffic as private vehicles, and that's going to work. It just won't work.
All right, Peter, I want to hit on something you said. You talked about these incremental steps. In UDOT's preferred solution, they go ultimately with the gondola, but with those steps before that. So talk about where you disagree with what UDOT is looking at right now.
Well, we don't disagree with the incremental steps. We think there should be incremental steps first. And then at some point, there needs to be a decision whether the incremental steps work or we need to do something further. So at that point...
So let me just be clear. At that point, would you then possibly be more supportive of the gondola?
At that point, we think the better solution would be a one-lane bus route going up in the morning and then going down in the afternoon. So that way you can either sit in your car and get stuck in traffic, or you can sit in a bus and go right up the canyon in an express bus.
Okay, Dave, talk about this preferred solution and these incremental steps ahead of the gondola.
Many of the solutions that are being considered are either in place or in process right now. We incentivize carpooling. We have a segment of our parking dedicated to reservations. We're thinking we will likely expand that in future years. But at the end of the day, we have too many people who want to be in the mountains on a year-round basis, and we need to find a way to get them up and down the canyon without widening the road, which would be devastating to the climbing resources. It would have a terrible impact on the water in our canyon. We need fewer vehicles. We need a new way for people to get up and down the canyon that is clean and has no impact on air quality here along the Wasatch Front.
Okay, let's get into some specific impacts, and let's start with environmental. Peter, when you take a look at the environmental impact, how does that play out in the way you support this proposal?
Well, all those solutions will have an environmental impact, so you can't get around having some impact. We just feel the gondola solution has more detrimental impacts on the environment than other solutions. You'll have 25-story towers. I think there will be 22 of them, so the visual impact will be tremendous. And then you'll also have to put in the towers themselves, and that will also affect the gondola, and you'll need to obviously get to them at some point, so you need ways to get to each of these different towers. So as much as others say it's not going to have much of an impact, we think it will have a significant environmental impact, not only visually, but on our watershed as well.
Dave, what's your argument for the gondola when it comes to environmental impact?
Well, it's clear that from an emission standpoint, from an impact on the actual acreage in the canyon, it's much smaller with gondola. These towers are very small in comparison to a scenario that UDOT considered, which was road widening. We think that would be a very bad idea to put that much cement, basically building a Provo Canyon in Little Cottonwood Canyon. We don't think a 4-lane highway is a good idea. We still have 64 avalanche paths in Little Cottonwood Canyon. Putting more people on the road only increases the avalanche hazard index. It's more dangerous, and we don't need that.
Let's get into the financial aspect of it. Obviously, all of these solutions are going to cost money, but from that standpoint, how does that play into the way you look at this, Peter?
Well, the biggest issue is, $600 million, and frankly, it's going to primarily support 2 ski resorts because it will only have 2 stops at Alta and Snowbird, and so we think that's not the best way to spend $600 million in taxpayer monies. First of all, there's plenty of other needed infrastructure resources in our valley. We have the Great Salt Lake that's drying up, so we need to spend that money wisely, and we don't think the gondola is the best way. Also, we think it's not the most efficient manner of getting people up the canyon. I understand the parking lot will have 1,500 to 1,800 parking spaces at the gondola. Otherwise, somebody will have to take a car to a parking lot, then a bus to the gondola station, then the gondola station up. So the time it will take to actually get to the mountain will cause people to probably take it once as a novelty and then not take it again.
All right, Dave, address that, the financing and the convenience.
There's a lot of speculation going around right now about what it will cost to ride the gondola. We don't know that. We don't know what a toll would be. That will impact how many people ride it. That's a key part of this whole equation. And until we know what the toll will be and what the cost will be of riding the gondola, we won't understand exactly the revenue that will come in from this installation. But I believe, as I've studied this extensively, this will be a revenue-generating transportation system that's very different than building roads and bridges. If people are paying to ride this gondola, which, by the way, would be a stunning ride up Little Cottonwood Canyon, then we're generating revenue that offsets some of the cost. Road widening is just expense. There's not going to be revenues generated from that. So I think as more and more people learn about how gondola would work, you're starting to see more people support gondola than previously, and now a majority of Utahns are supporting it according to recent surveys.
We have 1 minute left, 30 seconds each. I want to talk about population boom. We've hit on that a little bit. By 2040, we're expecting even more. I couldn't imagine where we are today as a kid, and I certainly can't imagine where we'll be in 2040. So how does that play into this equation, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's going to not get better unless we do something. So we have to do something. We're seeing more and more people also go to different ski resorts. They're going up to Weber counties where they know that it'll be an hour to get up there, and going to Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons, maybe 35 minutes or maybe 2.5 hours. So I think what we maybe need is more ski resorts. I think we also maybe need more flexibility with the ski resorts about their ticket sales and allowing people to ski at different hours of the day rather than having everybody cram in between 7:30 and 9:30 in the morning, which is when we get 8,000 people that come up the mountain.
All right, I have to give Dave opportunity to weigh in on this. 30 seconds, Dave.
We're seeing visitation numbers in the summer that rival our winter visitation. People want to be in the mountains on a year-round basis. We need a transportation solution that gets people up and down the canyon safely, reliably, and it could also be something that, as Utahns, we're proud of. This would be unlike anything else in the world. The longest gondola in the world here in the state of Utah would be stunning, and it's a great transportation solution. We need to think progressively about transportation and not rely on the old ways.
All right, gentlemen, we will have to end it there. A very interesting conversation. We will see how it proceeds from here. Thanks so much for your time this morning. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now to look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. The canvass period for the election runs through tomorrow. The following day, Board of Canvassers will meet to certify the election results. Then the general legislative session, it's coming up. Opening day, Tuesday, January 17th. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.